A beginner's orchid course. Orchids 101. Most of us are introduced to orchids with a phalaenopsis, often given as a present for housewarming, birthdays, etc. And we don't really know how to look after them. Sometimes they're just treated as cut flowers and tossed afterwards, but you don't have to. You can get them to flower again and again and again every year. Let's have a look at just some of the basic orchid care tips that you need to look out for to ensure that you can grow your orchids successfully. Welcome to the Nature Company. If this is the kind of information you're interested in, please hit that subscribe button down below if you haven't already, and that notification bell to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. So in orchid care, there's a very basic 5 things that we need to look out for. That's the light, which is the sun. It's the media, what we grow our orchids in. It's the pots that we put the media in to grow our orchids. The watering, which is a very important factor in growing orchids. And the feeding. Let's look into each one of these and just give you a breakdown on the basics. With regards to the light and sun that orchids need, how much light do they really need? If I go put them in a dark room, are they going to survive? Not particularly. You're not going to get it to reflower anyway. Orchids generally like fairly bright light. That doesn't mean they want that direct sun blasting on them, but they do want some nice bright light conditions. If you're in the northern hemisphere, you want to put them either in an east-facing window, which gets all that beautiful morning sun, and then that still stays fairly bright through the rest of the day. Or a southern-facing window, which is going to get long extended hours of light, which is particularly good for orchids. A west window can be very problematic because that's where you get all that harsh afternoon sun and all that heat from. So unless you've got a net curtain or something to protect it from that harsh light, then you may have problems growing it in a west window. A north-facing window often is considered low light conditions in the northern hemisphere. That's where you get the least light throughout the day. Not necessarily particularly good for orchids that want all that good light. In the southern hemisphere, all you're going to do is swap that north and south facing conditions around. You're going to get all the good lights on the north facing conditions and all the poor light on the south facing conditions in the southern. But no matter where you are, the sun always rises in the east and sets in the west. Remember to give your orchid as much light as possible, but preferably a nice bright filtered light. The direct sun is going to burn the leaves, and too little light is not going to allow your plant to flower. So that's the very basics on the lighting conditions. Looking at the media, orchids are not like other houseplants. They are epiphytic. They grow out on trees or on rocks where their roots are all exposed to the air. They're not planted in soil. So don't use a potting soil for your orchids, particularly these epiphytic ones like Phalaenopsis. They want a well-drained media, and you should be looking at something like bark or sphagnum moss or lacquer, something that's going to drain quickly but still hold that little bit of extra moisture to keep your plant happy. For beginners, it's always best to stick with something like a bark media that's going to be easier for you to manage. It's going to drain quickly without holding too much moisture. Things like sphagnum moss can start to compact and really hold that moisture in and start causing problems with root rot. Also, if you are in drier climates, you're going to need a media that's going to hold more moisture. So perhaps then you want to start adding things like sphagnum moss into your mix. For wet and cold climates, you don't want your media to stay wet that long. So you're going to have to look at a media that's going to drain faster and allow for more air movement, because in those colder or more humid environments, evaporation is going to take place more slowly, and you're going to land up with more wetness in your media for longer, which is what orchids don't particularly like. They like water and then to dry out afterwards. So the choice of your media is going to do a lot with your cultural and environmental condition. The type of pot is also important. It influences the root health and the growth of your orchid to ensure that you get all these beautiful flowers. You can get anything from these clear pots, which are ideal for beginners, because that allows you to see straight through into your pot, so you can check the moisture content and the quality and health of your roots. Also ensure that there's always drainage holes at the bottom of your pots to ensure that any water that you're going to be giving it is allowed to drain freely out. Also, things like clay pots are particularly good for orchids. They allow for faster evaporation of moisture from the pot, as well as allowing for that breathability to the roots. Also, air pots with all those big holes drilled into them are particularly good for orchids. It allows air straight into those root zones, allowing for faster evaporation and drying out of the roots so you don't get any root rot. So again, if you've got bigger, heavier plants, you want a bigger, heavier pot. So of course, you'll choose something like a terracotta. So again, the decision on the type of pot you're going to be using is going to be dependent on a few different factors on how you're going to be looking after your orchids. And if you're battling to find pots, have a look down at our Amazon link in the description box down below. We have a wide variety of orchid-specific pots available for you. Now that we've managed to choose our pot and media, we need to understand our watering and be very careful of it, because watering or overwatering is the biggest killer of orchids. We tend to love them too much, thinking they're thirsty, and we just keep watering them, and that's what's going to kill them. What we want to do is we want to give it a good, solid, proper watering, and then allow it to dry. We want the media to be fairly dry to the touch, not parched, but dry. And then, and only then, do we water again. And how do we go about watering? Well, one of the easiest ways to do it is by putting it in a bowl and filling up the water. So we're watering from the base and then pulling it up and allowing it to drain out completely again. Yeah, that way we're saturating the roots and the media, ensuring there's enough water available to the plant while draining out all the excess water from those air gaps. So one of the reasons that we're doing this watering from the base is because we don't want water to sit in the crown. The crown is this top part of the plant, and we can see how easily water can accumulate in there. As soon as we get water accumulation in the crown, there is a high possibility of crown rot happening, and that's going to kill off your plant. So rather water from the base. So now that we have the basics of watering down, let's just go a little bit deeper. If you have chosen bark to pot your Phalaenopsis in, you're only going to have to water every 7 to 10 days because of how fast bark can drain. With something like sphagnum moss, you're only going to water between 10 and 14 days because sphagnum moss really holds water for a long time. So you're going to need to give it that extra time to evaporate out. Remember, watering is going to be very dependent on the pot and the media that you've used. Also on the temperature and humidity. The higher your temperatures are, the faster evaporation is going to take place. The lower the temperatures are, the slower it's going to take place. The higher humidities you have, the slower evaporation you have, and the lower humidity you have, the faster evaporation. So you need to take all of these into account when watering. So now that we've got our watering down, is that going to be enough to keep getting blooms out of our plant? Well, not really. Feeding is going to provide the correct nutrition for your plant to allow for healthy growth and flowering. And how do we go about feeding it? As a beginner orchid grower, it's generally suggested to use a generalized orchid fertilizer, something like a 20-20-20, that you're going to be using at half or quarter the recommended strength. This we're going to be using weekly during those growing seasons. That's spring and summer. And then in autumn and winter, we're going to be reducing the frequency to every second week or once a month as the plant goes slightly more dormant. As a beginner, it's also advisable to avoid urea-based fertilizers. For deeper insights into this, we'll drop a link in the description box below. Also, organic fertilizers can be extremely helpful for beginner growers where the concentrations of the nutrients are a lot lower and are easily accessible to the plant. Remember, with feeding comes flushing. Excess salts can build up in the media and we need to flush those out at least once a month. So Flush your orchids by allowing that water to pour straight through for about a minute to take out all those excess salts that may be harmful to your plant. Focusing on these 5 orchid essentials, you're setting yourself up for great success with your orchids. Let us know in the comment box down below if you need any deeper insights into any of these points, or check out the Buy Me a Coffee link down below where Ed posts a lot of orchid related content. Don't be shy, become a member and get all that bonus information as well. And thank you for watching. If you found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button down below, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.